How was Robbie able to write two novels that are techno thrillers? Right? If you'd ask people on the Xbox team, who's the least creative person on the team and the least likely to write an original novel, I would have been in the top of that list. Trust me. And yet, because I worked in a creative business for 10 years, I learned a lot of that and found part of my brain that I didn't know I even had. And I think it's difficult for AI to replicate that.
Welcome to the Startup to Exit podcast, where we will bring you world-class entrepreneurs and VCs to share their hard-earned success stories and secrets. This podcast has been brought to you by TIE Seattle. TIE is a global nonprofit that focuses on fostering entrepreneurship. TIE Seattle offers a range of programs, including the Go Vertical Startup Creation Weekend, TIE Entrepreneur Institute, and the TIE Seattle Angel Network. We encourage you to become a TIE member so you can gain access to these great programs. To become a member, please visit www.seattle.tie.org.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of our podcast from Startup to Exit. I'm here with my co-host Shirish Nadkarni. My name is Gowri Shankar. We both serve on the board of TIE Seattle, which produces this podcast. First of all, we both want to thank you for all the support that you've given us over the last year, where we have brought this podcast to all of you. And I hope all of you have enjoyed all the content that we're bringing from our guest. We are launching a very special series. We are launching a series that is very close to both our hearts because we are both Seattleites. Microsoft just turned 50, and as a tribute to the company and the impact it's had on the world and our city, we are going to talk to some of the very early executives who shaped and grew the Microsoft brand to what it is today. I hope all of you enjoy it. We will be talking to many of them, and over the time, you will learn a lot of things about the early years of Microsoft. Thank you all, and hope you enjoy it.
Welcome, everyone. Today is our third installment of our Microsoft at 50 series. We bring you Robbie Bach, who was the Chief Xbox Officer and the founder of Xbox at Microsoft. Before founding Xbox, he ran Microsoft Office and made it into a standard it is today. He's also an author of 2 books, and I believe he's on the way with his third book. First one is called Xbox Revisited, and the second one is called Wikes Insurrection. So I recommend you take a look at these books. I've read the first one. I highly recommend it. So welcome, Robbie.
Thanks, Shirish. Before I get myself into trouble with my best friend Pete Higgins, I think he gets more credit for Office than I do. I just get the marketing credit for Office, not starting the whole thing. I think John Devon, Chris Peters, and Pete might take a little exception to that remark.
So I'm sure you had a big role to play. We'll talk more about it. Absolutely, that's great. So let's start with your early career at Microsoft. Tell us when you started at Microsoft, what made you join Microsoft, and then what did you do before becoming Chief Xbox Officer?
So I started Microsoft in August of 1988, and I came from business school. And the reason I came to Microsoft really was the interview day. And, I had this, as many of us did, this incredibly intense, like 7-hour-long interviews on one day. And everybody I talked to was very different, but all super smart, super intense, super focused. And I walked away exhausted and exhilarated at the same time. And, Brad Chase took me out to dinner, which was supposed to be the relaxing time. And the dude interviewed me for an hour straight. I didn't even get anything to eat. He's a close friend. I still give him a hard time about that. But that interview day was amazing. So I started in August. I was assigned in marketing to what was then called the Entry Business Unit. Not the best name ever created, but I was working on Microsoft Works. Did that for about 18 months, and then I went overseas to work at the European headquarters. I was the first U.S. going overseas expat at the company.
That's quite unusual. That's quite unusual. Not many people did that.
Yeah, it was an awesome experience. I worked for Bernard Varon there as his business manager. He was incredible, and that was just really a career and life-changing experience. And then came back to be group product manager of Excel, then group product manager for Office as we created Office, working with Mark Cruz and Hank Vigil. And then after Office, I made sort of a shift and went to be a business unit leader and ran this thing called Learning and Entertainment, which was a collection of things from the old consumer division. That included our games business, which led to the formation of the Xbox team. And I led the Xbox team for 5 years, and then it worked for me for another 5 years for the last 5 years I was at Microsoft. And in that last 5 years, I also ran some music work, some other entertainment assets, as well as our mobile assets. And so I left Microsoft in 2010 to go on to do what is now mostly civic work, plus my writing and public speaking, and a bunch of board work.
Yeah, yeah. So, which year was it that you joined Microsoft Office?
Office would have been 1992 when I came back from Europe.
Okay, so at that time, yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, Office existed on the Mac and had been on the Mac for like 4 years at that point.
Yeah, yeah.
And there was a version of it that I guess loosely existed on Windows, but the real first version of that shipped in late 93, early 94.
Right.
Was a great episode called Office Airbox, which we could talk about if you want. That's a very funny part of Office history. But
yeah, please do, yeah.
Well, when Office became Office, in the real sense, there was 3 people on the Office development team, and a bunch of people on Word and Excel and PowerPoint, and at that point, Access hadn't shipped yet, and so this release that we were bringing them all together was like this shared menu structure with no shared code. So all the menus looked alike. There was no shared code. There was this thing called the Microsoft Office Manager, which was an extra toolbar that helped you navigate between the apps. And that was going to be Microsoft Office. Well, unfortunately, Word shipped first, Excel shipped 3 months later, and PowerPoint was another 5 months after that. And, we had this great conversation with Steve Ballmer. Mark Cruz and I were on believe it or not, a video teleconference call with Steve. He was in Europe, and he was really, I would say, energized, let's say that in the Steve Ballmer phrase, about the fact that Office was not shipping together. And so we had this long discussion, this great video moment where, because audio and video didn't sync at the time, Steve was expressing his emotion to us in audio. And then about 40 seconds later, we saw all the hand motions that went along with the audio. I'll never forget that meeting. So we created this thing called Airbox, which when that version of Office shipped, which we ended up calling Office 4, when that version of Office shipped, it had Word disks in it and coupons for Excel and
coupons. Yeah, makes sense. Yeah.
When we did, we fulfilled Excel and PowerPoint when it shipped. So that was the Airbox version of Office, which was the first version of Office we shipped together, and then we did Office 95 and Office 97 after that.
Mm-hmm. So certainly at that time, Microsoft Office was not the market leader in productivity applications, right? So, but you were, as I mentioned earlier, one of the key contributors, along with others, to make Microsoft Office into a standard it is today. So what were some of the key strategies in your mind that you followed to drive the market share leadership for Office?
Well, I think there's a couple of things. I mean, look, first of all, you got to give a lot of credit to the product teams. The Word Excel teams going into that were really category focused. Mm-hmm. And they were, Word was fighting WordPerfect and Excel was fighting 1, 2, 3. And those teams were organized and motivated around that. And Louis Levin, John Devon, Chris Peters, ultimately Steven Sinofsky, they helped shift the culture of those teams to actually focus on Office. And that was probably a 2 to 3 year process. But it's really actually quite remarkable, because I will tell you, the Word and Excel team didn't even like each other when I joined the Excel team, right? I mean, they were arguing about the pixel height of the toolbar, right? I mean, they weren't actually working super close together, but the leadership was.
Mhm.
Those guys changed the culture of those groups. So the first thing is getting the product teams aligned on thinking about Office as an entity, not
Mhm.
as like a package.
Mhm.
So that's the first thing. Second thing that I will say worked in our favor in a big way was the realization that desktop applications were becoming a corporate IT purchase, not a departmental level purchase. When I first joined Excel, the guys you were talking to, you're thinking about, well, we got to get the finance department to buy Excel.
Mhm.
And pretty soon, IT directors had realized that there was all this application purchasing going on in their organization. They were getting no economic efficiencies. And by the way, supporting all the different apps that people were buying was a complete pain in the butt. So they started centralizing the buying. And when they did that, the fact that we had Office with a leader in spreadsheets, arguably the leader in spreadsheets, and a leader in word processing, again, arguably the leader in word processing, meant they could buy one package from one company with one support system and one contract. And that was a huge problem for Lotus and WordPerfect because they just couldn't offer that. And so the sales team, obviously played a dramatic role in making that happen. And then, on the marketing side, we started talking about shared things. We really started showing demos where you could, take something from Excel and drop it into Word. And we created this marketing term called IntelliSense, which was how we described all the things that the development teams were automating. Like suddenly the AutoSum button became IntelliSense technology, and background spell checking was IntelliSense technology. It's like how they call everything AI today, right?
Right. Yeah.
And so, so you start to use those marketing tools to sort of make all of that happen. And having that leadership made a big difference. And then the final thing, if you're a marketing person, you think about pricing. And, being able to price Office at the same price that Word and Excel were selling for alone was kind of a cool thing. So we took the upgrade pricing for Word and Excel. So if you're a WordPerfect user, the price you paid for upgrades to Word and the price you paid to upgrade from 1 to 3 to Excel, added those two up, and that's what it cost to get Office. It was a great deal. So that whole combination, product stuff, sales stuff, marketing ideas, kind of came together in a unique period of time. The last thing I'll say, the transition to GUI was a monstrous advantage for us because Lotus and WordPerfect just couldn't decide to eat their character-based apps and truly commit to graphical user interface.
Right.
And so the fact that we didn't have much market share in the character world anyway. So
Yeah.
we could really commit to GUI. That made a huge difference.
Right. Got it. So from Office, you went to the consumer division.
Yeah.
What made you? Office was where the action was. So what made you decide to go to the consumer division?
Well, in '97, in early '97, we launched Office '97, and honestly, it was the third version of Office I'd launched. I felt like I wasn't learning a whole lot. I kind of felt like, if I'm honest, a little stale in my career. And I wanted to get beyond just being in marketing. I wanted to get in general management. And I actually thought about leaving the company. It was a very funny story. I asked Pete Higgins for a meeting, and I worked for Richard Fade, who worked for Pete, but Pete and I were pretty close, and Richard knew that. So, I went to talk to Pete and Richard about, hey, I'm thinking about leaving the company because I'm kind of feeling like I'm stalled. But of course, and I walk into that meeting in a completely separate exercise that honestly had more to do with other people than it did to me. They called the meeting to promote me to vice president. So we had this weird discussion where I was at a meeting to tell them I was thinking about leaving, and they were at a meeting to tell me that I'd just been promoted. In the end, Pete agreed that I should shift from marketing into a business management role. And he had just taken over the consumer division from Patty Stonecipher, and he had a role for for the products that were Encarta, Magic School Bus, our kids' applications, and the PC gaming business. And so I went to run that not as the marketing person, but as a business person. And that was kind of the perfect shift for me because I went from being on a big mothership where, I wasn't really probably qualified to do the general management role, to working on a smaller business where I could learn general management and learn to work with development teams and do all that kind of stuff, which was really awesome. It was the beauty of Microsoft at the time, because you could advance in your career and learn at the same time. And that was amazing.
That's great. That's great. So let's talk about Xbox now.
Yeah.
There's a whole story behind the how the idea came about from an offsite and so forth. So tell us more about it.
Well, there's sort of two trails of the Xbox creation story, both of which are true and both of which are real. There were groups of people who were some of whom were ex-3DO employees, some of whom were DirectX employees. There was some people from a couple of other consumer places that were kind of throwing around various ideas for Microsoft doing a game console. And they were doing this as what I would call a garage shop effort. And so those groups were sort of doing their work in the background. And they've been sort of lobbying to get some attention, etc. We then go to an executive staff retreat, and and we had this thing called Open Spaces. I don't know if you remember this, Shirish or Gowri. They did this thing at the executive staff retreat where you could propose a topic, and you would write it on a big piece of paper and throw it up on the wall. And then after all the topics were on the wall, people got to vote which topic they want to talk about. Then you went to that topic and went with those people to a room and did a breakout session. So Rick Thompson proposed a topic: should Microsoft do a video game console? Because he knew about all this garage shop work that was being done. And Bill had a topic that he proposed, and they decided to consolidate some topics, and his topic kind of went away. So he came with us. So we literally went into like a hotel room, like there were two beds and a desk in there. And so everybody climbs into this room to discuss whether Microsoft should do a video game console. And Rick talked about the work that was being done. Bill probably knew about some of it, but he asked a bunch of questions and came back saying, all right, I'm going to dig in on this. Bring the product teams to me, and I'll evaluate whether there's an idea. 3 months passes on. In July of Steve calls Rick Thompson and I to a meeting, says, Bill thinks we have a product idea. He wants us to decide if there's a business to create. So Rick goes off to work on that. And for 6 months, works on it. And then December 21st of 1999, we had a meeting with Bill and Steve and some other people, and they approved what was called Project Xbox, because it was most of the technical ideas came from the DirectX side. They kind of won that battle on the technical side. And so most of the technical ideas came from the DirectX team. So it was Project Xbox.
Interesting. So the idea, the X came from DirectX.
Correct.
Okay, got it.
Correct. And by the way, to your viewers, there's a great 6-part docuseries on this that Microsoft put out on the whole Xbox experience, which, if you're interested in Xbox, is an awesome tour through Xbox land, and really talks in much more detail about the things that I just described and sort of the intricacies of how those decisions got made. So the project gets approved in December of 1999. In February of 2000, Bill and Steve have sort of internalized what the team's actually going to do, because Bill's view was this is Windows in a console. And so, DirectX, Windows in a console, and, this is going to run Windows games, and, and the team view was, no, actually, that's not what we're going to do. We're going to build a video game console, and we'll use DirectX at the API level, but we're not going to use a lot of Windows code except for maybe some kernel code and some security code, and it's not going to run anything from Windows. And so there was this meeting, which afterwards we called the Valentine's Day Massacre, on the 14th of February, where Bill and Steve and a bunch of other people, we came together late one afternoon and yelled at each other for an hour and a half, 2 hours about what was right, what was wrong, what we should be doing. Bill was pissed. He thought we'd changed the idea. You know these types of meetings. You know how they go. And, of course, the meeting went way long, destroyed everybody's Valentine's Day plans. And, at some point we just said, well, okay, fine, then we're not going to do Windows on a console. So if that's what you really want us to do, we should do that. But if you want us to do a gaming console, we should pursue with our idea. And we had another 45-minute discussion about, well, what does it mean not to do this? Because people were legitimately worried about Sony producing a console that was effectively a PC in the living room.
Living room, yeah.
And at the end of that meeting, this great episode, Steve looks to Rick Belluzzo, who was my boss at the time. He looks to Rick Belluzzo and says, Rick, can these guys do this? If we approve this and let them go on the way they're going, do you think they can approve it? And Rick, of course, was a wonderful guy, great manager, not the perfect person for Microsoft. And Rick knew loosely what we were doing, but not really. But Rick's response was, he turned to Steve without hesitation and said, absolutely, they'll get it done. And Steve said, okay, you guys have our support. We won't second guess you.
That's great.
And Steve and Bill, to their credit, were the two biggest supporters in the senior management team of that project. And without their support, it would have gotten killed at some point in the next 2 to 3 years. They were incredibly supportive and incredibly helpful.
Bill was not a gamer himself, right? He never played. I don't get a sense that he was ever a gamer.
No, he really wasn't. Now, in classic Bill fashion, he decided that because we were going to do Xbox, he needed to start playing some of the games. So he would ask us, and we would send him games, and he would play them. And he was particularly interested in games that could broaden the audience, like a really hardcore gaming thing. I don't think he felt like he could add much value to our discussion of, whether Halo was a great game or not. But for some of the stuff we were doing for the casual consumer market, he gave us a lot of feedback. And obviously, he gave us a ton of feedback about Xbox Live because that was something new. There was a bunch of technical complexity to that. I mean, he could really help with that. And he was also super involved in the silicon discussions we had about CPUs and GPUs and in all versions of Xbox, honestly.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Got it. So, at that time, Sony and Nintendo were, the dominant players, a whole stock of games supporting their platforms. Not an easy market to go into by any stretch of it. Yeah. So what was your strategy to win? How are you going to differentiate yourself?
Well, so there's two sides to this, sort of. Let me just say, and on the one hand, our strategy was ship the world's most powerful video game console in 18 months and make sure the explosions look great, right? So, there's a certain part of this that was, classic Microsoft ego. We've never done this before, but we'll do it better than everybody else, and it'll be more powerful, so therefore it'll be better. So that's... And at one level, that was a huge problem for the team because we really weren't coalesced on a strategy. On the other hand, if you dig under the covers a little bit, in particular, if you talk to somebody like Jay Allard or to Ed Fries, both of whom were critical, and to Todd Holm, all three of which were critical to the success of this, we bet on a series of technologies that were just coming into the marketplace that were super important and turned out to be truly incredible bets. And, I wasn't even, it's classic. I'm the guy running the business. I wasn't smart enough to understand, A, how risky those bets were or how prescient they were in terms of the success. But go back to like 1999 and say, oh, we're going to bet on broadband. You forget that in 1999, broadband didn't exist.
Yeah. They still dial up. Yeah.
And nobody was convinced that the cable companies and the telcos were ever going to get it right. And yet in early 2000, we had a meeting with Bill and we told him we were taking the modem out of Xbox and just going to ship with an Ethernet port. I mean, that's a
quite ballsy move.
Yeah, it's a very big move. So that's one thing we bet on, which was huge. And so Xbox Live became this sort of seminal event in the gaming industry. I mean, if there's a thing that Xbox has given the gaming industry, there's Halo for sure, of course, but it's a different world of online gaming.
So was it your vision to have multiplayer games?
Well, so the first part is you bet on broadband so you can actually do really good multiplayer games. So that's the first part of the bet. So that's broadband. And then there's online gaming generally, which is, okay, we're going to bet on an experience that's different than any online gaming experience. You could play online at the time, but good luck finding the IP address of the guy you were trying to play. And by the way, if you found him once in one game, you had to find him some other way in another game. There was no concept of unified identity or any of those things. And so Xbox Live created the first social network.
Mhm.
Right? This is
Yeah.
long before Facebook. In
Yeah,
fact,
yeah,
it's before MySpace. And this is
yeah.
in 2002. So that's a giant innovation. And it was a subscription model. How many subscriptions did you have in 2002? Almost none. And the subscriptions you had were to magazines. So, add up now, I probably have 40. And so a subscription model with unified identification, with a great way to find people, a way to communicate with people, a network, was incredibly powerful. And so that was, a big, giant bet. And then the third bet was the product Halo, which without which we would have never been successful. And Halo was not just a bet on an individual game, but in 2001 when Halo shipped, first-person shooting games were not popular on gaming consoles. They were almost strictly associated with PCs because you have to be able to aim a gun and move a character at the same time, which meant people used a mouse and a keyboard. And so the Halo guys came up with this unique control mechanism that let you use a game controller to do both.
Mhm.
And so betting on a first-person shooter, again, was one of these big bets. So you put all that together, and if you step back after the fact, you'd say, oh, our strategy was to differentiate with online gaming and to bet on broadband and to bet on a subscription service and first-person shooters. And I never articulated it that way at the time. I will say maybe there were other people who were smarter than I was on the team who could have articulated it that way, but never really thought about it that way. But that's in fact what happened.
That's great. That's great. All right, over to you, Gowri.
Thanks, Shirish. So, Robbie, let's go back a little bit, right? So in 87, you choose Microsoft, you go through the interviews, and I'm sure there were other choices. Microsoft was one of the companies, but not the company, right? There were other choices. So coming out of business school, what attracted you to Microsoft at that point?
Well, like I said, the first thing that attracted me was just the intensity of the people. And not just their intensity, but their smarts. And people were super friendly. I mean, I liked all the people I interviewed with. But, one of my first interviews was with John Nielsen, who was ultimately he was my fifth manager, but my first manager in my first month. I had 5 managers in my first month at Microsoft. So John and I ultimately got to know each other quite well. My interview with him, we had one question in the interview. At the beginning of the interview, he asked me, which is more important, sales or marketing? And we talked about that for an hour. And so, and John, of course, sad that he passed away so early, but was just a wonderful guy and was super friendly, super nice, but intense. And we had this great conversation. So ultimately, as is often the case, people was sort of a key factor in making that decision. Likewise, Jeff Rakes, who was the head of apps marketing at the time, and ultimately the decision maker for those hires, went the extra mile to bring me up to Microsoft so I could meet international people. The country managers were in town for a meeting. He paid for me to come up to Microsoft to meet them because he knew I wanted to work ultimately overseas. And even though Microsoft didn't do it at the time, he went out of his way to do that. So, you just had this sense that the people were great. Second thing is, at that time, so again, 1988, tech is obviously starting to blow up and the PC is going great guns. And I had the opportunity to switch from a finance background into marketing and to work in tech. And the other jobs I had that had offers on were better paying, absent of stock, but were better paying in salary, but were in medical instruments and consumer marketing and other places, which just weren't, frankly, that interesting. And Microsoft offered this, incredible opportunity to do that. So, and I'd spent a summer in the Northwest in Portland, so I knew about the weather, I knew about what I was getting myself into, and actually liked it. So it was just a lot of factors that came together in a really good way.
That's been the secret of Microsoft, right? Get everybody here in the summer and then and then get them hooked
Yeah,
after
for sure. For sure.
Yeah. So let's kind of shift into this consumer division.
Yeah,
Microsoft had committed itself as a software company, was not going to be a hardware company. Had
right,
never, no pedigree per se in hardware at that point.
right.
Now you are deciding to take on arguably, uh, at that time, I would think Sony was the best hardware company. Apple was there, but
Yes.
Sony had that Apple-esque halo around it, right? So what gave the confidence, other than the fear? There was some existential threat that Sony could take over the living room, but there was also that you need this confidence more than to overcome the fear that you can do it. What was the team's confidence saying, "Hey, we can blow this thing up"? Other than pounding the chest to the external world, there has to be an internal capability or leadership that said, "We are going to do it."
So it's super interesting. Rick tried for 5 months to not do it. The original idea actually was for Microsoft to OEM the spec
Uh-huh.
to other OEMs. And Rick went out and talked to third-party publishers about it, and he talked to the hardware OEMs as well. There's people like Samsung and people you'd expect. And everybody uniquely hated that idea. Samsung hated it because they didn't think they could make any money on the hardware, and they were right about that. And people like Electronic Arts and Activision hated it because they thought that the person who marketed the hardware had to also market the games. And that separating those two things were bad for the business. And they had just lived through this experience with 3DO, who tried exactly that model and failed pretty miserably.
Mhm.
And so, truthfully, when we got to December, the answer was do this ourselves or don't do it. So that's part A of the answer. Part B of the answer is, you have to go back to the time. Microsoft was at the, and it's now in a wonderful place as well, but it was at the peak of its sort of existence at that point. I mean, we were at the top of the technology food chain. And with all due respect, I think most people at Microsoft didn't think that hardware was that hard to do. We kind of looked and said, oh, yeah, the PC manufacturers, they make PCs. Yeah. But sure, we could do that. And I hate to say it, but there was an ego level and a little bit of an arrogance level about, we can do this. In part because Microsoft had attacked so many new businesses at that point, true just on the software side, but had been successful at almost every step of the way. And so the idea that putting together what was essentially a PC architecture in a box was going to be difficult, we said, sure, there'll be some challenges with it, but we're going to go ahead and do it. And there was a bit of blind faith. And, if I think about it in hindsight, if I knew in 2001 when we shipped the product, if I knew then, if I'd known the same information I had at that time back in 1999, I might have recommended to not do it. It was truly miraculous and a testament to an amazingly dedicated group of individuals that the hardware actually shipped. I mean, literally at the end, we were using duct tape in the manufacturing facility. Our DVD drive had a rattle to it. There was a problem with that. They had to duct tape it to the frame of the console to make it not rattle in the initial implementation. I mean, they had to work so hard. People went and lived in China for like 3 or 4 months to just ship it. So it was an incredibly hard thing. And, we lost, depending on how you do the cost accounting, $5, $6, $7 billion in the first 4 years. And all of that was because of the way we did the hardware. That's not a complaint to the hardware team. They did what they had to do to ship the product on time. They lived to the spec. But it wasn't until we got to the second version of the product that we actually knew enough to how to do the hardware the right way that would work in the video game space, that you could cost reduce and price at the right level and not lose your shirt, that we got it right. And, not many companies could survive that.
So did
Microsoft.
it become profitable then during that time you were there?
Oh, the first 4 years were not close to profitability. We turned profitability once we shipped Xbox 360. And the hardware, I don't think ever got profitable. The thing we had to do, we lost $50 a unit at the gross margin line in the first version. So every time I went in and told Steve that sales went up, that meant that profits got worse. And
Yeah.
the more we sold, the worse it got.
Mm,
In Xbox 360 land, we probably broke even on the hardware.
mm.
And collectively over the life cycle of Xbox, I suspect that's maybe they make a little bit of money now. Phil's a smart guy, so maybe he's smarter than we were at the time, and maybe they make a little bit of money on the hardware. But the business model was never really designed for the hardware to make money. The business model was designed to kind of break even on the hardware. You know, that's the razor, and then you make money on all the razor blades. You make money on Xbox Live, you make money on peripherals, you make money on games, you make money on third-party royalties, la. And in the second version of Xbox, we did that really well. Xbox 360 was a very profitable product.
So you had this unique relationship with publishers, right? Because you are a publisher, and then you had to bring other publishers to get on board with your hardware. There was questions whether you would, that would be a long-term thing or not. How did you at that time convince everybody this bet's the best bet they could make? Because the publisher had to make a bet, because they was working on other devices at this point, or they were publishing for either Sony or Nintendo or something like that.
Well, we had an advantage in this respect, which is that Nintendo increasingly didn't want and didn't care too much about third-party publishing.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they had so much of their own content and so many of their own franchises that they didn't want the competition. And so they weren't recruiting heavily for other people to join their platform. And they actually were making it difficult for people to publish on their platforms. And Sony was just not very third-party friendly.
Mm.
You know, they sort of felt like, hey, we're the only game in town. If you want to, Electronic Arts, Activision, if you want to publish, come to the PlayStation, but this is what you're going to have to pay us in royalties.
Mm-hmm.
And sure, we'll help you a little bit. But in particular, if you were a second tier or third tier publisher, you got zero love from Sony.
Mm-hmm.
So our strategy was to be the publisher's best friend.
Mm.
And so basically, when we went to meet with them, first things first, I went to meet with every publisher twice a year.
Mm.
And I don't think the head of Sony meant to meet with any of them except when they were at a trade show, maybe. But we did visits at their facility every year. And we shared with them everything we had. We answered every question they had. So there's a personal commitment aspect to this, not just from me, but from the senior person at Microsoft. Sometimes we got Bill and Steve to meet with them. They knew Microsoft cared about what they were doing, way more than Sony did. The second thing is we were really quite aggressive about making it clear to them that if you want to have a balance to Sony's power in the marketplace, you need somebody with Microsoft's pocketbook there. And you need somebody with Microsoft's capability to balance out what Sony's doing.
Mm-hmm.
Our success will make you more money.
Mm-hmm.
Not just because you'll sell units on our platform, but because it will keep Sony honest in the marketplace.
Mm-hmm.
I think that was a key reason why Electronic Arts signed up, is because they were struggling in their relationship with Sony and arm wrestling over power and royalties and all the rest.
Mm-hmm.
And then the third thing we did, which was a George Peckham innovation, George led our third-party group. We basically said we're not going to offer volume discounts to publishers.
Mm-hmm.
So you might say, well, Electronic Arts and Activision probably didn't like that. And the truth is they didn't. But it did attract the next level of partners to the platform because they were getting killed by these volume discounts. Sony or PlayStation, Activision and Electronic Arts were getting discounts on royalties. So they're paying less royalties to Sony, which gave them some pricing power. And people like Ubisoft and THQ and others didn't get those discounts. So we basically said to people, there's no volume discounts. If you come to us with an idea, we will jointly market it with you. So we'll pay for some marketing for games we like. But we don't care whether those games come from Activision or Electronic Arts or Ubisoft or THQ or somebody else. And, ultimately that leveled the playing field a little bit in the publishers. And if you were EA and Activision, you didn't mind it so much because you had Call of Duty, which you knew we were going to support. You had Madden, which you knew we were going to support. So you got your discount in marketing, not in royalty dollars. But if you were Ubisoft and you had the Tom Clancy series and you were getting no love from Sony, you could come and be the first guys to do a great Xbox Live game with a Tom Clancy series, and suddenly you had a big market and you got supported by us. So the combination of all of those things worked really well with our publishers. George and his team were a little known but secret to our success. I'd go into a meeting, sometimes you go into a meeting with the publisher and you'd be talking about their upcoming game titles. And it was clear that George's team knew as much or more about the upcoming game titles as the senior leadership at the publisher did. They were really deep with the development teams, really deep with the external development teams. And having that level, this comes from Microsoft's historic, work with developers, right? And there's some DNA in Microsoft about developer support and management that carried over into the Xbox world that was really powerful. And again, doesn't get written about a lot. They don't get a lot of love or credit, and they deserve a ton of credit for what we did with those guys.
So you think it's very cultural at that point that your first 10 years in with the mothership, as you described it, allowed you to really understand it, and that became cultural in Xbox as you built it.
Look, there's a we build a platform thing that everybody says. Microsoft, because we had lived that for so long and really knew what it meant to build a platform and knew what it meant to attract third-party publishers. I mean, Lotus and WordPerfect were third-party publishers. Different business relationship, but the same idea. And so the fact that we understood how that worked was really powerful. And we had people inside George's team who really understood that DNA and what it meant to provide that support. And by the way, it wasn't just the publishing team. We had developers who were assigned to work with those publishers. So they were actually helping in the development of the title. When Xbox Live required you to use voice, every one of our publishers said, oh, that's crazy, that'll never work. People worried about bandwidth and all the rest of the stuff. Well, the development team created a bunch of tools to make it easy. And then we had developer support who went and worked with them and helped them implement it. And suddenly it's possible. And that's all old school Microsoft. That's all old school Microsoft.
So let me ask just a tangential question, right? With the experience that you had by then building Xbox and hardware and all that, was there ever a discussion that you would be an Xbox phone? Because it would have been you already were in China, you knew how to build stuff, right? Was there ever a thought process?
Well, actually, the thing that people wanted us to build was what the team called X-Boy, which was a competitor to Game Boy. So a handheld game. Remember, phones in these early 5 years, phones were a very separate category, and were not honestly all that digital, right? There weren't screens on them.
Yeah.
Right. So, or at least not real screens on them. So, the thing they wanted us to build was X-Boy. And the problem with that was it was a nice brand connection, but technically almost no synergy.
Yeah.
So the idea that we're going to take on Nintendo in handheld gaming while we're taking on Sony and Nintendo in console gaming. And build yet another piece of custom hardware in a different form factor and need new games. And I mean, we would have had to basically recreate a whole new Xbox team to do that. And we talked about it a lot and we just said, no, we're not going to do that. Eventually, as I'm sure you'll get to, we did try to do Zune. We'll talk about why that didn't work. But we never really talked about doing a phone inside the Xbox group, at least not to my knowledge. Ultimately, phones came to join my team. The mobile group came to join my team, and ultimately we did do some phones. But not in the time where I was, not in those first 5-6 years of Xbox.
Right. But you touched on Zune or other hardware experiments that you went on. Other than Microsoft had to be a better iPod. What was the thinking? Because there was not. Did you have this knowledge of how to handle publishers? Because the whole different genre of devices.
Yeah, I think there was a number of challenges in Zune
Mm-hmm.
and a number of successes.
Mm-hmm.
So kind of have to catalog both of those. Challenges.
Mm-hmm.
So first, why did we do it?
Mm-hmm.
All right, Zoom was designed to deal with the fact that we had all these Windows media players out there,
Mm-hmm.
none of whom were gaining traction against Apple, and none of whom who were successful. And truthfully, if we're honest, the experience on those players was nothing like the experience on an iPod.
Mm-hmm.
It just wasn't good. And the reason it wasn't as good is because you had, nobody organizing the total consumer experience.
Mm-hmm.
Right? You had the Windows experience on top of another piece of software on another piece of external hardware that was all kind of glommed together.
Mm-hmm.
And the seams showed. There are cracks in the experience, and the experience just wasn't very good.
Mm-hmm.
And so we had this discussion about, well, to make the experience good, we have to do it ourselves. And again, the decision was made that, having iPod control what was going on in the music space wasn't good for Microsoft long term, and so hence Zune was born. Now, why did Zune not succeed? Couple things. One, we were very late, like we were with gaming, but even later.
Mm-hmm.
Two, in the gaming space, Sony made a number of mistakes with PlayStation 3 that we were able to take advantage of. Honestly, Apple executed like a machine. They just didn't make any mistakes. They didn't leave us a crack to get in there. And three, we made some big bets in that space, and the bets were good bets and mistimed. So as an example, we bet on a subscription music service. And the Zune subscription service was like 5 years before Spotify.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a really good idea.
Mm-hmm.
And the music labels weren't ready for it
Mm-hmm.
and didn't want to support it.
Mm-hmm.
It made it very difficult for us to do it.
Mm-hmm.
Consumers, frankly, weren't quite ready for that. This was right in the heat of iTunes being successful and people buying 99-cent songs. So the idea that you would buy a subscription and pay for that every month and consume your music that way just wasn't quite ready. The Zune player, leave aside the hardware for a second, the Zune player was a great player and had a really nice user interface, was really good, and it was Spotify before Spotify. And that team, the software team, should be really proud. The hardware team did great work. They were just, constantly chasing Apple's great work, which was really hard. So there's a timing factor and a business model factor and an ecosystem factor there that just worked against us. And being late made it worse. It's one of the things in my reflection on my time at Microsoft. It's one of the things that I gets underrated, which is timing really is everything. If you think about so many of the innovations in the marketplace, Microsoft oftentimes had the right idea mostly too early. Right? You think about automotive and automation in the car. Really good ideas, probably too early. Media server. There was this thing called Tiger, you guys probably remember.
Yeah.
Really good idea, too early. Pen and handwriting. Really good, probably too early, and maybe not quite the right technology because capacitive touch would turn out better. There's just a bunch of things where we get the timing wrong. And then we had some things where we were too late. And phone certainly falls in that category. And so did the music space. And gaming almost. And if Sony hadn't made mistakes, we might not have been as successful.
So Sony is still a dominant player in the gaming space. So going back to 1999, you said, "Hey, if I'd known things, I would not have recommended it." Right? Now that you know where Xbox is and where Sony is, where Nintendo is, and if you were to go back to the same room where Steve asked you, "Hey, would you be doing it?" What would be your advice to him or the current CEO?
There's two different issues here. If you say, "Hey, would you like to own the Xbox business?" Today's Xbox business, I'd say 100% absolutely yes. I think Phil and the team have done a fabulous job a little bit extracting the games business from the definition of the hardware and making more of it a cloud-based service and really thinking about that in a great way and making it a content-driven business and all those kinds of things. And I think they've done an excellent job doing that. So I think it's a great business. Now, if you say, is it a great business for Microsoft? Right? It's a little bit of a trickier answer because Microsoft, honestly, today is not that much of a consumer company and was more of a consumer company when I was there than it is now. I mean, even Office, when I joined it, was a consumer business. We sold it. Egghead software, right? And it was a packaged product, consumer-oriented business. Of course, then it went on to become an enterprise business, and now most of Microsoft's business is very enterprise focused. So in an odd way, it's not the perfect fit. I suspect that, and I don't know anything from anything, but I suspect the reason they continue to invest in it is it does drive innovation and new ideas and new talent into the organization and new ways of thinking about things that is powerful for the enterprise side of the business. And it's an innovation engine for other things. And I think that's real.
So they made a huge acquisition, right? Activision.
Yeah.
So what's your take? Given there's this AI thing that's looming, theoretically, the power is shifting to everybody in some new world order where anybody can be a publisher in theory. Let's assume that. How would you rate that acquisition, knowing that they probably knew AI was coming anyways? Is the franchise still there?
Yeah, so I'm far from the expert on this. I would say a couple things. One, Activision was clearly an undervalued asset that needed to be sold. And it had nothing to do with their gaming assets. It had everything to do with some things that were going on in the company. And so the asset had been hit pretty hard. So I think they got good value for the money. Let's say that. Even though it sounds like a lot of money, Activision's a huge company with some just incredible content. And it's important to note that they had a lot of mobile gaming content. So it kind of made the portfolio at Microsoft much more multi-platform. And they have a lot of PC gaming content. So now you've got phone, PC, and console. You really are becoming more of a content company than you are a hardware company. And I think that was part of what the strategy was behind it. Robbie's opinion, Robbie's been gone for 15 years, so what does he know? But that's my opinion. As far as AI goes, I think this is an unknown. Sure, I think code can be written with AI. I'm not sure the Halo concept gets created in AI. I'm a believer that human creativity is a difficult thing to recreate. Could you give somebody 5 first-person shooters and train AI to produce a 6th first-person shooter? The answer is, of course, yes. Would that be a new creative idea? I don't think so. And so I'm a believer in human creativity. And gaming is this weird combination of Silicon Valley and Hollywood. So AI will help the Silicon Valley part of it, sure. It may make it a little less expensive to produce a game. But I don't think it's going to help the Hollywood part of it very much. And I'm not, if you believe in content innovation and new ideas and new creative storylines and all those kinds of things, maybe I'll be surprised. But I think the human ingenuity aspect of that is really high. And it's very easy to undersell the human creativity part of what goes into a game.
As a novel author, you have to believe in that, right? You can come up with better stories than any AI can come up with.
Well, and the interesting thing is, the word better is a funny word, right? Because to me, there's this innovation, new angle, new push that is the difference maker. You could argue AI might write better code or might write something more efficiently. We can have all those arguments. But the idea that some new twist on what's going on is going to come from some AI engine, which, by the way, had to learn from some other things, maybe we'll get there. I'm a believer in the advancement of technology, but I'm also a huge believer in the human spirit, and I do believe that carries on in gaming. It's the thing that's underappreciated about gaming. How was Robbie able to write 2 novels that are techno thrillers,
Mm.
right? If you'd ask people on the Xbox team, who's the least creative person on the team and the least likely to write an original novel, I would have been in the top of that list. Trust me. And yet, because I worked in a creative business for 10 years, I learned a lot of that and found part of my brain that I didn't know I even had.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's difficult for AI to replicate that.
As a leader, a lot has been said and written about your 3P framework. Can you
Sure.
share more about that for our viewers?
Yeah, and I will give credit where credit's due. The 3P framework came from an offsite we had as a management team after the original Xbox shipped, and we knew it was screwed up from a business model perspective and from a what's next perspective. And we went off of this offsite at Salish Lodge, and we said, we got to fix this. And we had sort of this 2.5-day battle amongst the management team about how do we fix it? And the Silicon team's asking us for direction about what the next version of Xbox is going to look like, and we had no idea. And so Jay Allard had this idea that he talked about as the P's. And he talked about it as purpose, principles, priorities, planning. And, how do we write a document that does that? And so we decided we would write a 3-page document that described the purpose, principles, and priorities for the next version of Xbox. And that document, it turns out, you think that's easy. That was super hard. I did the first 2 drafts. In the end, I wrote the whole thing, but the drafts were heavily edited by other people. The first draft was 12 pages long because as humans, we want to complexify and detail the idea. And the whole idea behind the 3P framework is you get one sentence to tell me your purpose.
Mm-hmm.
A computer on every desk and in every home running Microsoft software. One sentence that describes Microsoft's purpose. The company ran on that for 25 years.
Mm-hmm.
Pretty powerful.
Mm-hmm.
And so the question is, can you write that one sentence? And then can you write 5 principles for how the team's going to work and how you build culture and how you make decisions? And the Xbox team was completely screwed up on that. And we had to make a lot of changes to get the culture right, get the decision-making right. And even in Xbox 360, it wasn't perfect, but it was way better. And then priorities. Oh my gosh. If you'd asked somebody, tell me the 5 priorities for the original Xbox, nobody could have come up with the same 5 priorities. We would have had 15 of them.
Mm-hmm.
And so getting the team to focus, the team's reaction to the first 3P framework that we shared with the next 46 people was, well, thank God you told me what not to do, which is really powerful. And so I've used this, so I've sort of turned this into, quote unquote, Jay's idea into a framework. And I use it in the consulting work and the board work I use. And the first book I wrote, Xbox Revisited, is about that 3P framework. And it really is an awesome way to sort of galvanize a team and say, this is where we're going, this is how we're going to get there, and this is what we're going to do to make it happen. I mean, it's strategy at its really core elements. And then we had, after that 3-page plan, we had this idea that there'd be a 30-page more detailed plan and a 300-page spec, which ended up being an 80-page PowerPoint deck and about a 5,000-page set of specifications. I don't even know what Xbox 360 spec count would be. But you let the team develop all of that based on the 3P framework. And it has changed the way I think about strategy and changed the way I think about business management in a fundamental way. And I give a lot of the credit to Jay and to the team for adopting it and making it happen.
It seems like it's almost excellent life advice for young entrepreneurs. Shirish and I talk to a lot of young entrepreneurs today. It's just good life advice, whether you become an entrepreneur or don't. Write 3 pages among the 3 Ps. If you can figure it out, then a 30 will occur. If it's not good, then there's nothing there.
It's so funny you say that because I have a 1-page, I do it in outline form now.
Yeah.
And I have a 1-page 3P framework for what I do.
Yeah.
My purpose statement is to inspire and empower an army of civic engineers. That's my purpose statement. I have a set of principles that I operate under and a set of things that are priorities. Every 6 months or so, I relook at the priorities, make sure they're right, and keep at it. And I've been using that now for, 7, 8 years. It's super helpful from getting your mind in the right space. To me, complex problems require great simplicity. And thinking that through has been super helpful.
I think that's the key, right? I mean, the key is you make decisions simple because you have this framework within which you put this through, and then everything goes away. You almost have to sculpt your decision down to those three things, and if that was the only three things, it'll all sort of fit, and you will have most importantly, I don't think you regret because you have committed to the three P's. That's the challenge with decisions is always regret. Should I have, could I have, would I have? There's no should, would, coulds once you made it, but if there's no regrets, then there's no need to look back.
Yeah, and I mean, you may be wrong, so you have to accept that the three P's might have been the wrong set of priorities, so you may get it wrong. But the other thing about the three P's that's awesome is it makes delegation so much easier.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Because you can take that document, you give it to the next level of management, and they don't have to ask about priorities.
Mm-hmm.
The priorities are there.
Mm-hmm.
They don't have to ask about how they're supposed to work. The principles are there.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're in a meeting and somebody's acting in a way that's not consistent with the principles, it's easy to point out and say, hey, that's not the way we do things.
Yeah,
It can be super powerful if you really dig into it.
Yeah. I think we're going to push young entrepreneurs who come to us for advice to kind of simplify this and say, just give it to your team; they will figure it out.
Well, the truth be told, the original Xbox team was the most talented collection of people I've ever worked with. But really talented. And the Office team, by the way, was too. But this Xbox team, diversity of talent, hardware, software, services, marketing, sales, really the most talented group of people, and totally dysfunctional as a team. And the second version, in part because of the 3P framework and in part because of other changes we made, was a way better team. And that to me is just a key takeaway from me, and the ability to move decisions down in the organization. We weren't perfect about it, but we did better. Made a huge difference because the people who are close to the problem made the decisions.
Yeah. We could talk on just this topic for a long time, Robbie. Forget Xbox for now. This is the real game we are playing here. But
yeah, I know.
So, Shirish, back to you to wrap things up.
It was a wonderful conversation, Robbie. Brings back some old memories. I'm not a gamer. My son is a avid gamer. In fact, I could only play for 15 minutes with him because I'd be bouncing off the walls and feel nauseous. I don't know if you have this.
Well, Shirish, do not play any virtual reality games. If you're nauseous in a regular video game, the virtual reality game will take you to a new level.
Yeah. All right. So thank you so much for this conversation and also sharing a 3P framework. For the viewers out there, please check out Robbie's first book, Xbox Revisited. He talks a lot about the 3P framework. I think as an entrepreneur, is something that you should look at adopting, and you'll get a much deeper look at that framework in that book. So thanks again, and all the best for you.
Hey, thank you. Thanks for having me, and thanks for doing this for Microsoft. 50 years is an amazing thing.
Thank you. Bye. Thank you for listening to our podcast from Startup to Exit, brought to you by TI Seattle. Assisting in production today are Eesha, Jain, and Minee Verma. Please subscribe to our podcast and rate our podcast wherever you listen to them. Hope you enjoyed it.